coming to you live from the media center here at Nasrec, and you can see behind me these tables are empty and many of the journalists have gone home, but the hard-working ones, kidding, we're all hard-working, and many of us are trooping on until a very late point into the evening. But they've been gracious enough, and I just want to show you here, they've been gracious enough to show us the rugby where the Springboks are leading right now. In fact, just moments ago before you crossed to me, Sasha Feinberg and Ngomezulu had scored a stunner, but that's not why we're here. We're here to talk about the G20, and I'm joined now by Larry Madowo, who is an international correspondent for CNN, and he's been covering this. In fact, Larry covers this across the world in many different ways, speaks to presidents all the time. So he understands the heart and the rhythm of a type of gathering like this. And of course, this was a big moment for Africa and for South Africa. Larry, did we pull it off?
I think you pulled it off. You got a lot of people to come here and to pay attention, and South Africa got that declaration with overwhelming consensus, according to President Ramaphosa, on the first day, which usually doesn't happen. The Argentines, they didn't like it. The Americans obviously were not here, but overall, I think it was a triumph.
Were you surprised by the Argentines' move?
Not surprising. I think President Ramaphosa expected it, and he gave some history to that. And he said, despite their objections, they've been allowed to say it. That does not mean the declaration is nullified. And it's another thing that this declaration went through, because had the U.S. been here, some of the language you see there about the climate action would probably not have been there. Debt restructuring, some of that language would not have made it in there.
Let's talk about the absence of the Americans. One would have assumed the absence would be a lot more conspicuous than what it was, but it seems like the show went on without them, something Donald Trump obviously would not be very happy about. Do you think the Americans fumbled the moment? And more than that, do you think South Africa responded in a way that was that met the moment?
I think South Africa acted in a way that we have a job to do and we'll do it. And you sense a sudden frustration from the other leaders that showed up, from President Macron, from the Finnish and Norwegian. Other European leaders were here who said and defended multilateralism. They said we cannot shy away from collaboration and cooperation in the world. We have so many challenges. We have to come together to talk, to deal with them. And I think the final act of President Ramaphosa and South Africans saying, you know what, if they do not want to come here to hand over the presidency, we will not do it to a junior official. So in TikTok language, South Africa is essentially saying we're matching your energy, aura for aura, band for band.
Yeah, let's talk about that. The absence of the U.S. from this and a declaration being adopted, and many, I think, what one would consider G7 partners of the U.S. threw their weight behind South Africa for this moment. Does that render Trump and the U.S. a little bit more irrelevant in global affairs? But more importantly, the attack that we've seen on multilateralism has in part been led by Donald Trump in the U.S. Does that weaken their sting a little bit?
If you read through the lines of what the leaders said today in their opening statements, a lot of them criticized the transactional way in which President Trump does things. However, they did not expressly call him out by name. One, and two, President Trump will never be irrelevant in international affairs. He's just too powerful. The U.S. occupies a central place in the minds of so many people, and also is the next G20 president. So he understands that, and he's going to put on a show when the world goes to Florida next year.
My suspicion is, and the theme for South Africa's G20 was inclusivity, sustainability, and solidarity. Trump said, I don't like that language. It is the antithesis of my politics. And this was at the time he was sort of sponsoring an anti-DEI politics in America. Would that translate to an America leading a G20 cohort that would try and undo a lot of that type of politics and that language?
Oliver, that's almost certain. What you saw in this declaration, it's 30 pages long, by the way,
yeah.
122 different elements. I think this will be systematically pushed away. They will chip away at it. And the job of the UK, which will be the next G20 president, is to try and restore some of it. So over the next year, the Troika, which is the former presidency South Africa, the current, which of the United States and the UK, have to work together. And I think South Africa and the UK have to kind of work in lockstep to make sure that they protect some of what was agreed here. The International Panel on Inequality, the debt restructuring, some of these declarations, they have to stick to them and make sure they make it to London or to wherever the UK will host their G20.
Let's talk about one of those resolutions in that declaration, really important, and that's on debt, right? You spoke to a number of heads of state and business leaders at the Africa CEO Forum earlier this year, and debt was a big part of the atmosphere in the room at the time, and debt restructuring, debt cancellation, debt reconfiguration, or forgiveness in the way that sort of Greece would have experienced a little bit in the between 2008 to 2012. Is that something that would have enticed and excited the African leaders in the room in a way that doesn't alienate the Western partners and Bretton Woods institutions? I mean, you're a finance guy in your previous life, so you know a lot about the numbers.
I was paying attention, Oliver, to what the leaders here said. The president of Sierra Leone, Julius Maada, talked about this. President Netumbo Ndaitwa of Namibia talked about this.
Got a delicious coffee here, by the way. The hospitality here is absolutely amazing at the G20.
Oliver got coffee, but did not get me any coffee, even though he knew we were going to do this walk together. SABC, is this how you treat your guests?
Well, you had a lot of our coffee, and we certainly had a great lunch earlier, you and I. But you'll say?
They treated us very well. No, seriously, the African leaders have been talking about this almost like a broken record. They need the rest of the world to pay attention. And President Ramaphosa said this at the beginning, that one of the 4 key areas of South Africa's presidency has been on the issue of highly indebted countries and debt restructuring and making sure that this debt burden does not weigh down these countries. And I think they've been very consistent on that. And in the people that were invited, they reinforced that message.
Cool. I just want to step away from the G20 a little bit. You've been doing really important work over the last couple of weeks, work that I think is perhaps important for safeguarding democracy on the continent. And that is putting the spotlight on what's been going on in Tanzania. We've been covering at the SABC the post-election violence that has been taking place and the crackdown on the internet and the riots that have been breaking out. And of course, what they denied to be police killings. And you and your forensics team did an amazing job at looking at a number of key important indicators around, was the police involved in the killing of Tanzanian protesters? Talk to us a little bit about the outcome there. And I mean, very little of it is conclusive at this stage because they haven't been allowing in foreign media. But you learned a lot through your forensics investigations.
We did some important work about Tanzania because Tanzania had an election on October 29th, and shortly after the election it descended into chaos. Then they declared a curfew, shut down the internet, and gagged the media. So in the days from the election and after that, a lot of people were killed and there was no reporting about it. And so I spent some time with my team speaking to more than 100 Tanzanians, and they took a lot of risks to speak to me because the government in Tanzania has made it illegal to share any of the reports of what happened, pictures, video of people getting shot by police. And so we wanted to put some of CNN's resources in understanding what happened here, and we did conclude in our reporting and this forensic investigation that yes, Tanzanian police did kill protesters, many of whom were unarmed, some of them were running away, and they didn't pose any threats to the police. And in the time since we released that documentary, it's been 2 days, nobody has come up to say a single thing we said that in that was a lie, because we spent a lot of time audio forensic analysis, satellite imagery to find signs of mass graves, and we're very proud of that work.
Let's put some human texture to it. And I want to go to Arusha. And your output shows this video footage of a woman who was running away with her back to the police. And the investigation shows very clearly that she was shot. She was 3 months pregnant at the time, a breadwinner for her family. That was tear-jerking, to say the least. And you said that's just the tip of the iceberg, but you also seem to have discovered mass graves, at least through forensics analysis. Talk to me about that.
We wanted to focus on this story in Arusha because it highlights what happened in many other parts of Tanzania. We only barely scratched the surface. And that woman, we know her name, we know her family. They were too scared to speak on camera, even though they've lost greatly. And that speaks to the situation and the fear across Tanzania. And yes, we did find signs of mass graves in one location north of Dar es Salaam, in an area called Kondo Cemetery. We have had so many other tips. We did not report anything that we cannot prove, and it's still work that continues. We will do some of it, and lots of other media need to do it so that whatever happened in the days, in that week when the internet was shut down and the media gagged, the world needs to know.
You and I were trying to debate over dinner earlier, whether or not this is commensurate or worse than what we saw in Mozambique or what we saw in Kenya in 2007. Post-political violence seems to become quite ubiquitous on the continent. What your investigation shows you now, where does this stack up in terms of the scale of post-political killings?
It's impossible to know how many people were killed in Tanzania, and that is part of the reason. When you have journalists, the media who are not allowed to report, it's not safe for them, when the internet is shut down, when the government is actively calling a video fake, when we verify the video is not fake, it adds a cloud of mystery, and it has this chilling effect on the truth. So we don't know how many people died in Tanzania. We know how many people died after the post-election violence in Kenya in 2007, 2008, more than 1,500. There's possibilities that more could have died in Tanzania. The opposition claims as many as 2,000 were killed there. And that is concerning. And Tanzania has been a beacon of democracy. It's a popular tourist destination in Africa, and many Tanzanians have been rightly proud of that, and they were shocked by what happened here.
Yeah. Larry, thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate it. Always fantastic speaking to you. Thank you for always making time when you're around and necessary. That's international correspondent, CNN international correspondent, Larry Madowo.